The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the deserted gas station, its rays catching dust motes dancing in the air like tiny fireflies. Ana Garcia stood beside her weathered Toyota Camry, one hand resting on the fuel nozzle while her thoughts drifted to the family reunion awaiting her just a few hours down the road. The familiar weight of her military uniform felt both comfortable and strange after weeks of deployment. A reminder of who she was and what she'd accomplished, even as she tried to slip back into civilian life. Her worn sneakers, a deliberate choice for the long drive home, scuffed against the concrete as she shifted her weight. They were a small rebellion against military precision, a touch of comfort she allowed herself on leave. The sound of fuel flowing into her tank created a steady rhythm that matched the slow, peaceful beating of her heart. Around her, the world seemed to hold its breath, the kind of stillness that comes just before something changes. The station sat like an island of fluorescent light in a sea of gathering dusk, its weather-beaten sign creaking softly in the warm breeze. Ana watched the numbers on the pump tick upward, each click bringing her closer to home. Her dark hair, pulled back in a regulation bun, caught the last rays of sunlight, and for a moment, she allowed herself to imagine her mother's face when she walked through the door. It had been too long. 8 months of video calls and text messages couldn't replace the warmth of a real embrace. The isolation of the station should have felt eerie, but to Ana, it was a welcome respite. After months of constant companionship in close quarters, the solitude felt like a luxury. She inhaled deeply, savoring the mix of gasoline fumes and desert air that reminded her of childhood road trips with her father, himself a veteran who had taught her the value of service and sacrifice. As she watched the numbers climb, Anna's thoughts wandered to the medal ceremony just before her leave, the weight of the commendation on her chest, the proud faces of her commanding officers. She'd earned her place, proved herself time and again. Yet somehow the strongest memory was of her younger sister's voice over the phone, excited about showing her the acceptance letter to West Point that had arrived while Ana was deployed. The pump clicked off with a sharp sound that seemed to echo across the empty lot. Ana replaced the nozzle, her movements precise and efficient despite her fatigue. The receipt printer whirred to life, spitting out a paper record of this mundane moment. She tucked it carefully into her wallet, old habits of accountability dying hard. Standing beside her car, Ana took a moment to stretch, her muscles protesting after hours of driving. The evening air had begun to cool, carrying with it the scent of sage and creosote from the surrounding desert. She could have sworn she heard her mother's voice in her head, urging her to get something to eat, to take care of herself. A smile tugged at her lips. Some things never changed, no matter how far you traveled or how much you achieved. The sound came first, a distant rumble that could have been thunder if the sky wasn't so clear. Anna's training kicked in before conscious thought, her posture straightening as she tracked the noise to its source. Around the bend in the highway, a group of motorcycles appeared, their chrome flashing in the setting sun like signal mirrors. The peaceful solitude of moments before evaporated as the riders approached, their engines drowning out the gentle desert sounds. Ana watched their approach with the careful neutrality she perfected over years of service, noting details automatically. 7 riders, mixed ages, patches on their leather vests suggesting veteran status. Under different circumstances, they might have been allies, brothers and sisters in arms, sharing stories over coffee. The lead rider, a barrel-chested man with graying temples and a neatly trim Ed Beard, guided his Harley into the station with practiced ease. The others followed in formation, their arrival transforming the quiet space into a carnival of noise and movement. Ana could feel their eyes on her as she closed her gas cap, the weight of their attention setting off warning signals in her mind. She recognized the shift in atmosphere, had felt it before in other places, other moments when her presence challenged someone's expectations. The leader's gaze lingered on her uniform, then dropped to her sneakers, his expression darkening like storm clouds gathering on the horizon. Ana kept her movements measured and calm as she walked toward the station store, determined to pay for her gas and continue her journey without incident. The first comment came just as she reached for the door handle, a deliberate stage whisper meant to carry. Since when does the army issue running shoes as standard gear? Laughter followed, sharp and mocking, cutting through the evening air like shrapnel. Anna's hand paused on the handle, her reflection in the glass, showing her the choice before her. Walk away or stand her ground. In that frozen moment, she thought of her father's words from years ago. Your uniform carries the weight of every soldier who wore it before you. Wear it with pride, but remember, respect is earned in how you carry yourself, not in how others see you. The group had begun to spread out, their positioning casual but deliberate, creating a loose semicircle that would force her to walk through their midst to reach her car. The leader, Carlos, she would later learn, stepped forward, his boots scraping against the concrete with deliberate heaviness. "Hey, sweetheart," he called out, his voice carrying an edge that set Anna's teeth on edge. "Halloween's not for months. Where'd you get the costume?" Anna turned slowly, her movement controlled and precise. The setting sun cast long shadows across the station, turning the scene into a stage where every gesture carried weight. She met Carlos's gaze directly, neither challenging nor submitting. Her posture reflected years of training and the quiet confidence that came with knowing exactly who she was. The other riders had killed their engines, leaving an expectant silence broken only by the distant hum of highway traffic. Anna could read the dynamics playing out before her. The way the others looked to Carlos for cues, the mixture of amusement and uncertainty in their expressions. She'd seen it before, this delicate dance of power and prejudice, but never expected to face it here, in this quiet corner of America, wearing the uniform she'd earned with sweat and determination. Carlos took another step forward, his movement deliberately intimidating. The patches on his vest caught the fading light. Campaign ribbons from conflicts Anna recognized, service that should have fostered understanding rather than this confrontation. The irony wasn't lost on her. "Got something to say?" he pressed, his voice carrying that particular tone that men sometimes used when they wanted to remind women of their physical advantage. Or did they not teach you how to speak in basic? The comment drew chuckles from his companions, but Anna noticed at least one of them shifting uncomfortably, perhaps recognizing the situation was veering into dangerous territory. She took a slow, steady breath, centering herself the way she'd learned in countless high-pressure situations. "I have nothing to prove to you," she said, her voice clear and steady. The words carried across the station, hanging in the air between them like a challenge and a statement of fact rolled into one. "I'm just here to pay for my gas and continue my drive home." Carlos's face darkened, the casual mockery in his expression hardening into something more dangerous. "Nothing to prove? Wearing that uniform means you've got everything to prove, especially when you're disrespecting it with those shoes." He gestured to her sneakers, his movement sharp with contempt. Real soldiers know better. Anna felt a familiar surge of anger, but let it pass through her without taking hold. She'd faced worse than this, much worse, and had learned that true strength often lay in restraint rather than reaction. Still, she couldn't help but notice how the other riders had begun to move closer, their body language suggesting they were committed to whatever course their leader chose to take. "My record speaks for itself," she replied, her tone remaining professional despite the growing tension. "As does my right to wear comfortable footwear while on leave." She took a step toward the store entrance, maintaining her composure even as Carlos moved to block her path. The sun had nearly set now, the station's fluorescent lights creating harsh shadows that seemed to emphasize the growing hostility of the situation. Anna could feel the weight of multiple gazes on her, some hostile, others uncertain, as the confrontation balanced on a knife's edge between resolution and escalation. Carlos's next move changed everything. His hand shot out, aiming for her collar in a gesture meant to intimidate rather than harm. But Anna's training took over before conscious thought could intervene. Years of muscle memory and countless hours of practice transformed her response into something fluid and automatic. She stepped inside his reach, using his own momentum against him. In one smooth motion, she redirected his grip, twisted his arm behind his back, and took him to the ground. The movement was textbook perfect, minimal force, maximum control, the kind of maneuver she'd taught to junior officers countless times. The silence that followed was absolute. Carlos lay face down on the concrete, his arm locked in a hold that left him helpless but unhurt. The other riders stood frozen, their expressions a mixture of shock and disbelief as they watched their leader being controlled by the very woman they'd been mocking moments before. "I suggest," Anna said quietly, her voice carrying in the stillness, "that we all take a step back and remember who we are. Veterans should be supporting each other, not creating divisions where none need to exist." She maintained the hold for a moment longer, ensuring her message was received, then released Carlos with the same controlled precision she'd used to subdue him. He pushed himself to his feet, his face flushed with a mixture of rage and embarrassment that Anna recognized as potentially dangerous. "You're going to regret that," he spat, reaching for his phone. "Let's see what the cops have to say about this assault. Bet they'll be real interested in checking your credentials, too." Anna remained still, her posture relaxed but ready as Carlos made the call. She could hear him painting a picture of unprovoked aggression, of stolen valor, his voice growing louder as he emphasized his version of events. The other riders had begun to shift uncomfortably, perhaps recognizing how the situation had spiraled beyond their expectations. The wait for law enforcement seemed to stretch endlessly, the tension in the air thick enough to cut. Anna used the time to center herself, to remember her training and the importance of maintaining professional composure even in the face of provocation. She thought of her family waiting at home, of the pride in her father's eyes when she graduated from basic training, of all the moments that had led her to this point. When the police cruisers arrived, their lights painting the scene in alternating red and blue, Anna felt a sense of calm certainty. She had nothing to hide and nothing to prove. Her truth would speak for itself. The officers approached with professional caution, taking in the scene with practiced eyes. Carlos immediately launched into his version of events, his voice carrying across the station as he described an unprovoked attack by someone he suspected of impersonating a service member. Anna waited patiently for her turn to speak, noting how one of the officers watched her with growing recognition. "Ma'am," the older officer said, cutting through Carlos's narrative. "Aren't you Sergeant Garcia? From the 10th Mountain Division?" Anna nodded, allowing herself a small smile as she produced her military ID. "Yes, sir. Just returning home on leave." The officer's face broke into a genuine smile. "My daughter served with you in Afghanistan. Speaks very highly of your leadership." He turned to Carlos, his expression hardening. "Now, would you like to revise your statement? Or shall we discuss the penalties for filing a false police report?" The shift in the atmosphere was palpable. Carlos's face went through a range of emotions: anger, embarrassment, and finally, a grudging recognition of his mistake. The other riders began to distance themselves, both physically and metaphorically, from their leader's actions. "I think," the officer continued, "we can resolve this situation without further escalation, provided everyone is willing to go their separate ways peacefully." He gave Carlos a meaningful look, though I'm sure the sergeant would be within her rights to press charges for attempted assault. Anna considered the option for a moment, watching Carlos's expression shift between defiance and concern. Finally, she shook her head. "No charges necessary, officer. I think we've all learned something here today." The resolution came quickly after that. The riders departed one by one, their engines breaking the tension as they pulled away into the gathering darkness. Carlos was the last to leave, his departure marked by a long look at Anna that carried something like respect mixed with his lingering resentment. As the sound of motorcycles faded into the distance, Anna finally allowed herself to feel the full weight of what had transpired. Her hands trembled slightly as she paid for her gas, accepting the quiet thanks of the station attendant who had witnessed everything from behind the safety of his window. The need for reflection and processing led her to a small diner a few miles down the road, its neon sign a beacon in the growing darkness. Inside, the warm lighting and smell of coffee created an atmosphere of normalcy that helped ground her after the intensity of the confrontation. A waitress with kind eyes and gray-streaked hair approached her table, coffee pot in hand. "Rough night, honey?" she asked, filling Anna's cup without waiting for a response. "I'm Linda. You look like you could use someone to talk to." Anna wrapped her hands around the warm mug, letting its heat seep into her fingers as she considered the offer. It's been interesting, she admitted, finding herself drawn to Linda's maternal presence. Ever have one of those moments where you're forced to confront other people's assumptions head-on? Linda pulled up a chair, her movement suggesting she had all the time in the world. Sugar, in 30 years of waiting tables, I've seen just about every kind of assumption there is. Want to tell me about it? As Anna recounted the events at the gas station, she found herself processing not just what had happened, but what it meant in the larger context of her experiences as a female soldier. Linda listened attentively, occasionally nodding or offering quiet sounds of understanding. You know what strikes me? Linda said when Anna finished speaking. It's not just about proving them wrong. It's about maintaining your dignity while doing it. Sounds to me like you handled it exactly right. Anna sipped her coffee, considering Linda's words. I just keep thinking about how many others face similar situations. Not just in the military, but everywhere. People making judgments based on appearance, on preconceptions. And sometimes, Linda added, the only way to change those preconceptions is one interaction at a time. One person standing their ground with grace and strength. She patted Anna's hand. You did that today, honey. Don't underestimate the impact he might have. The conversation with Linda proved to be exactly what Anna needed. A chance to process the event with someone who could offer perspective without judgment. As she finished her coffee and prepared to continue her journey home, Anna felt a sense of peace replacing the lingering tension from the confrontation. Word of what had happened spread through the small town surprisingly quickly. By the next morning, Anna's phone was buzzing with messages of support from fellow service members who had heard the story. Local veterans reached out to express their solidarity, some sharing their own experiences with prejudice and misunderstanding. The incident sparked discussions in the community about respect, assumptions, and the changing face of military service. Local news picked up the story, focusing not on the confrontation itself, but on the larger issues it represented. Anna found herself reluctantly thrust into a position of spokesperson. Her handling of the situation held up as an example of professionalism and restraint. A week after the incident, as Anna was settling back into the rhythm of family life, she received an unexpected visitor. Jorge, one of the younger riders from the group, stood on her front porch, his posture betraying his nervousness. I needed to apologize, he said without preamble when Anna opened the door. What happened that night? It made me take a hard look at myself and the assumptions I've been carrying around. Anna studied him for a moment, seeing the genuine remorse in his expression. Would you like to come in? She offered, recognizing the courage it must have taken to seek her out. Over coffee at her kitchen table, Jorge opened up about his own military service, about the biases he'd never questioned, and about the soul-searching her response to their confrontation had prompted. You could have pressed charges, could have made things really difficult for us, he acknowledged. Instead, you showed the kind of leadership we should all aspire to. Growth comes from being willing to examine our beliefs, Anna responded, sharing insights from her own journey in the military. The uniform doesn't care about gender, race, or background. It cares about commitment, capability, and character. Their conversation marked the beginning of an unexpected alliance. Jorge became an advocate for change within his riding group, challenging old prejudices and promoting a more inclusive vision of veteranship. The ripple effects of that night at the gas station continued to spread, touching lives in ways Anna never could have anticipated. As weeks turned into months, Anna found herself reflecting often on the incident and its aftermath. The confrontation had been a catalyst for important conversations about respect, prejudice, and the evolving nature of military service. She received letters from young women inspired by her story, from veterans examining their own biases, and from community members eager to bridge divides. The experience reinforced Anna's belief in the power of standing firm in one's truth while maintaining composure and professionalism. She began incorporating these lessons into her leadership training sessions, using her encounter at the gas station as a teaching moment for younger soldiers facing their own challenges of acceptance and respect within the ranks. During one particularly memorable training session, a young private approached her after class, eyes bright with recognition. Sergeant Garcia, she began hesitantly. My sister showed me the video someone took at that gas station. I've been carrying it on my phone ever since, watching it whenever I feel out of place here. The private's voice trembled slightly. It reminds me that we belong, that we've earned our place. Anna felt a complex mixture of emotions hearing about the video's existence. She hadn't known someone had recorded the confrontation, yet seeing how it had become a source of strength for others helped her appreciate the broader impact of that moment. The ripple effects continued to spread in unexpected ways, touching lives far beyond the immediate circle of those involved. Back at her unit, Anna's commanding officer called her in for a discussion about developing a formal training program addressing gender bias and conflict resolution within the military. "What happened at that gas station?" the colonel said, leaning forward in her chair. "It's a textbook example of how to handle confrontation with dignity. We need to institutionalize these lessons." Working with a team of specialists, Anna helped develop a curriculum that went beyond simple diversity training. It incorporated real-world scenarios, psychological insights, and practical techniques for maintaining composure under pressure. The program quickly gained attention from other units, spreading across bases as commanders recognized its value in building a more cohesive and respectful military culture. Carlos's transformation came as a surprise to everyone. 6 months after the incident, he approached Anna at a veterans event, his demeanor markedly different from their first encounter. The proud belligerence was gone, replaced by a thoughtful humility that suited him better. "My granddaughter enlisted last month," he said quietly, watching the crowd of service members mingling at the event. "She's shipping out to basic training next week. I've been thinking a lot about what kind of military I want her to serve in." Their conversation that day lasted hours, touching on themes of change, growth, and the weight of responsibility that came with wearing the uniform. Carlos shared stories from his own service, moments when he'd faced prejudice as a Latino soldier in a different era. "I became part of the problem without even realizing it," he admitted. "Sometimes it takes getting knocked down, literally and figuratively, to see what you've become." Together, they began organizing monthly meetups where veterans of all backgrounds could share their experiences and challenges. The gatherings grew from a handful of participants to dozens, then hundreds, creating a space for honest dialogue about the changing face of military service. Old barriers began to crumble as stories were shared, understanding grew, and new bonds formed across previously rigid divides. The gas station itself became something of a local landmark. The owner, inspired by the incident's positive outcome, transformed one wall into a mural celebrating diversity in military service. Local artists worked together to create a powerful image showing service members of different genders, races, and backgrounds standing united. Anna's silhouette, though not immediately recognizable, formed the central figure, a symbol of strength and dignity in the face of prejudice. Jorge's riding group underwent its own evolution. Under his influence, they established a mentorship program for young veterans, with a particular focus on supporting those who might feel marginalized or out of place. The group's leather vests now carried a new patch, a symbol of inclusion and understanding that represented their commitment to change. Anna's sister, following through on her acceptance to West Point, frequently called for advice on navigating the challenges of being a woman in a traditionally male-dominated environment. "Your gas station story is famous here," she reported during one late-night call. "The instructors use it in leadership seminars. They call it the Garcia Principle, maintaining dignity under pressure while enabling positive change." The term caught on, spreading through military circles and beyond. Civilian organizations began requesting Anna's presence at leadership conferences, eager to learn from her experience. She found herself sharing the stage with other agents of change, each contributing to a broader conversation about transformation and growth in traditional institutions. 1 year to the day after the incident, Anna returned to the gas station. The place looked different now. The mural, some new lighting, a small plaque commemorating the event that had sparked so much change. As she filled her tank, a young woman in Air Force fatigues approached her, snapping to attention before breaking into a wide smile. "Sergeant Garcia," the airman said, "I just wanted to say thank you. Your story, it made a difference for me during basic. Knowing that someone else had faced down prejudice and won, not through force but through strength of character, It helped me find my own way to stand tall. Anna noticed others at the station watching their interaction, not with the hostility she'd faced that night a year ago, but with respect and recognition. The air felt different, charged not with tension but with possibility. She saw how a single moment of standing firm in one's truth could catalyze change far beyond the immediate circumstance. That evening, sitting in the same diner where she'd found comfort after the confrontation, Anna pulled out her laptop and began writing. The words flowed easily, telling not just her story, but the larger narrative of transformation it had sparked. Linda, the waitress who had listened to her that first night, still worked there. She brought Anna coffee without asking, just like before. "Looking at you now," Linda observed, sliding into the booth across from her. "You're different. Stronger maybe, but that's not quite it. More at peace with your role in all this." Anna considered the question, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. "I think I understand now that sometimes our hardest moments become our most important contributions. That night wasn't just about standing up for myself. It was about standing up for every service member who's ever felt out of place, questioned, or undervalued." Her story, published first as a series of blog posts and later as a book, became required reading at service academies across the country. But more importantly, it became a source of strength for others facing their own moments of truth. The gas station confrontation, rather than remaining a painful memory, transformed into a touchstone for positive change. The military itself began to evolve, not just in policy, but in culture. Anna's experience highlighted the gap between formal inclusion and genuine acceptance, spurring discussions at the highest levels about creating meaningful change. Training programs were revised, leadership criteria updated, and new mentorship initiatives launched. Carlos and his former riding group became unlikely allies in this transformation. They started a speaking tour, visiting bases and veteran centers across the country, sharing their story of confrontation turned collaboration. Their honesty about their own prejudices and the journey to overcome them resonated deeply with audiences, creating space for others to examine their own biases. Anna's father, watching all of this unfold, finally shared his own story of witnessing discrimination during his service years. "I always thought staying quiet was the professional thing to do," he admitted during a family dinner. "Watching you handle that situation showed me there's another way, that we can challenge prejudice while maintaining our dignity and professionalism." The ripple effects continued to spread, touching lives in unexpected ways. A Hollywood producer approached Anna about turning her story into a film, but she declined, preferring to keep the focus on the broader movement for change rather than her personal narrative. Instead, she worked with documentary filmmakers to create a series exploring various perspectives on military service and inclusion. The gas station owner, seeing how his property had become a symbol of positive change, established an annual scholarship for veterans pursuing higher education. The selection committee, which included both Anna and Carlos, specifically sought out applicants who had demonstrated leadership in promoting understanding and inclusion within their communities. Jorge's daughter, inspired by the transformation she witnessed in her father, decided to enlist. At her graduation from basic training, both Anna and Carlos were present, standing side by side as honored guests. The sight of them together, once adversaries, now allies, spoke volumes about the possibility of change. As Anna prepared to return to active duty, she reflected on how a single moment of confrontation had sparked such far-reaching change. The incident hadn't just been about proving herself or standing her ground. It had become a catalyst for transformation, a reminder that sometimes the most powerful response to prejudice is to maintain one's dignity while creating space for others to grow. The story continued to evolve, touching new lives and inspiring fresh perspectives. But perhaps its most profound impact was in the quiet moments, in the confident stride of a female service member walking into a room full of skeptics, in the thoughtful pause before an assumption could become a judgment, in the growing recognition that strength comes in many forms and respect must be given as freely as it is demanded. Linda's words from that first night echoed in Anna's mind. Sometimes the only way to change preconceptions is one interaction at a time. Looking back, Anna realized that each ripple of change, each small transformation, had started with that simple truth. The gas station confrontation hadn't just been an ending. It had been a beginning, opening doors for countless others to walk through with their heads held high, secure in their right to serve, to lead, and to be respected. The gas station confrontation hadn't just been an ending. It had been a beginning, opening doors for countless others to walk through with their heads held high, secure in their right to serve, to lead, and to be respected. As Anna prepared for her next deployment, she found herself increasingly aware of how that single moment had created a cascade of positive changes throughout the military community and beyond. During her pre-deployment briefing, a senior officer pulled her aside. "Your story has become part of our institutional memory," he said, his voice carrying the weight of decades of service. "We've incorporated it into our leadership curriculum at every level. But what's most remarkable is how it's changed the day-to-day interactions in our units." He shared statistics showing a marked decrease in reported incidents of gender-based discrimination across multiple bases where the new training programs had been implemented. More importantly, there was a noticeable increase in intervention by fellow service members when they witnessed discriminatory behavior. The bystander effect that had allowed such incidents to persist was beginning to crumble. Anna's new assignment placed her in charge of a diverse unit preparing for overseas deployment. During their first assembly, she noticed how different the atmosphere was from her early days in service. Female soldiers stood with confidence, their male counterparts showing genuine respect rather than mere tolerance. The change wasn't just in policy, it was in the very air they breathed. One evening, while reviewing training protocols, Anna received an unexpected email from a military historian at West Point. The researcher was documenting transformative moments in military culture, and the gas station incident had become a focal point of her study. "What's fascinating," the historian wrote, "is how your response created a template for handling discrimination that preserves both dignity and unit cohesion." The historian's research revealed a pattern. Wherever the story had spread, there was a corresponding increase in reporting of discriminatory incidents, not because they were happening more frequently, but because service members felt empowered to address them. The culture of silence that had protected prejudice was giving way to one of accountability and support. Carlos, continuing his own journey of transformation, began working with veteran support groups, focusing on mental health and cultural change. He often spoke about how his confrontation with Anna had forced him to confront his own demons, the ways trauma and tradition had calcified into prejudice. "Sometimes," he would tell his groups, "our greatest enemy is the wall we build around our own understanding." The riding group's monthly meetings evolved into a national network of veteran support chapters, each dedicated to breaking down barriers and building bridges between different service experiences. They created a scholarship program for veterans pursuing careers in diversity and inclusion work, naming it the Garcia Carlos Fellowship, to commemorate the transformation that had sparked their movement. Anna's sister, now in her second year at West Point, reported that the academic curriculum had expanded to include case studies of positive cultural change within the military. The gas station incident was presented alongside other pivotal moments in military history, not just for its immediate impact, but for the ripple effects it continued to generate. During a training exercise, Anna observed a young lieutenant handle a situation that echoed her own experience. A visiting officer had made dismissive comments about female leadership, and the lieutenant had responded with the same measured dignity Anna had shown that night at the gas station. The lieutenant later confided that she had studied Anna's incident as part of her officer training. The gas station owner, inspired by the ongoing impact of what had happened at his property, established an annual community dialogue series. Military members, veterans, and civilians came together to discuss challenges and solutions in creating a more inclusive society. The first year's keynote speaker was a retired general who had been instrumental in implementing some of the military's earliest gender integration policies. Jorge's influence continued to grow within the veteran community. He developed a mentorship program specifically designed to help older veterans adapt to the changing cultural landscape of military service. "We can't change the past," he would say, "but we can choose how we shape the future." The documentary series that Anna had helped create gained unexpected traction in military training programs worldwide. Armed forces from other nations began requesting permission to use it in their own diversity initiatives, recognizing that the challenges and solutions it presented transcended national boundaries. Linda's Diner became an unofficial gathering place for service members passing through town. The waitress herself, though retired from full-time work, still came in specially for veteran events. She had a knack for spotting those who needed someone to talk to, just as she had with Anna that night. Anna's father, inspired by the changes he'd witnessed, began speaking at veteran events about his own journey of understanding. He shared how watching his daughter stand her ground that night had helped him recognize his own unconscious biases and the importance of active support rather than passive acceptance. The military's annual retention reports began showing an interesting trend. Units that had fully embraced the new inclusion training program showed significantly higher retention rates among minority and female service members. More importantly, they showed improved overall unit cohesion and performance metrics. During a congressional hearing on military culture, Anna was called to testify about the impact of grassroots change on institutional transformation. She spoke about how personal courage combined with institutional support could create lasting cultural shifts. Her testimony helped secure funding for expanded training programs and support services. The gas station's mural became a popular spot for military promotion ceremonies, especially for female service members and the others who had faced similar challenges. Standing before the artwork, with its diverse representation of service members, they took their oaths of advancement in a place that symbolized both challenge and triumph. Carlos's granddaughter, now completed with basic training, wrote to Anna about her experiences. "Your story prepared me for the challenges I might face," she wrote, "but more importantly, it showed me how to face them with dignity and strength." The ripple effects continued to spread in unexpected ways. Civilian organizations began adapting the military's new training programs for their own use, recognizing that the principles of respectful inclusion and dignified resistance to prejudice were universally applicable. Anna found herself increasingly called upon to advise on matters of cultural transformation within the military. Her experience had given her unique insights into how individual actions could catalyze institutional change. She developed a framework for understanding and promoting cultural evolution that became known as the Garcia methodology. The story became part of military folklore, passed down through generations of service members as an example of how to handle discrimination with professionalism and dignity. But more than that, it became a blueprint for creating positive change from negative encounters. Jorge's writing group established chapters at military bases across the country, creating safe spaces for veterans to discuss their experiences and challenges. The group's leather vests now carried a patch showing a gas pump wrapped in olive branches, a symbol of how conflict could transform into cooperation. The military academy's leadership curriculum was updated to include a module on transformative confrontation, using Anna's experience as a central case study. Cadets learned not just about handling discrimination, but about how to turn challenging moments into opportunities for positive change. Linda's Diner walls gradually filled with photos and memorabilia from service members who had stopped by to share their stories. Each item represented a moment of connection, a story of challenge and triumph, a reminder that change happens one conversation at a time. As Anna prepared for her next deployment, she reflected on how a single moment of standing firm had created such far-reaching change. The gas station incident had become more than a personal triumph. It had become a catalyst for transformation, a reminder that sometimes the greatest victories come not from defeating an adversary, but from creating an ally. The story continued to evolve, touching new lives and inspiring fresh perspectives. But perhaps its most profound impact was in the quiet moments. In the confident stride of a female service member walking into a room full of skeptics, in the thoughtful pause before an assumption could become a judgment, in the growing recognition that strength comes in many forms and respect must be given as freely as it is demanded. Anna's legacy wasn't just in the program she helped create or the policies she helped change. It was in the countless small moments of courage her story inspired, in the quiet decisions to stand firm with dignity, in the growing understanding that true strength lies not in domination, but in transformation. The gas station confrontation had become more than a moment in time. It had become a blueprint for change, a reminder that every challenge carries within it the seeds of progress.